You're listening to the Brown Sign Project podcast.
Do you spend hours creating your rotas and then spend days constantly adjusting them? We have the solution. At Staff Savvy, we specialise in shift schedules and timesheet solutions for visitor attractions. Easily manage multiple complex teams of permanent, casual, freelance and volunteer staff across different locations and disciplines. With fast communication features, automatic compliance tools, training management and simple timesheet tools, Staff Savvy has been used and trusted by organisations such as V&A Dundee, the South Bank Centre and the Royal Albert Hall, with great cost-saving benefits. Visit us at staffsavvy.com/Brown Sign Project to learn more and schedule a demo of our magic rota button.
Welcome to the Brown Sign Project, the podcast that talks to some of the most entertaining, experienced and influential voices in the tourism and attractions industry. I'm Carly Strawn.
And I'm Carlton Gadjadar. In this episode, we're delighted to speak to Paul Griffin, who is the director of Payne Hills Park Trust. Paul knows a lot about taking care of special historical places, and he has a wealth of experience in the heritage site, and he'll be sharing all that information with us on this podcast. He loves what he does, and the enthusiasm for the people he works with is infectious.
As well as giving us his top tips for growing your career, he highlights the need for a sense of humour. And you really have to hear the story about the incident at the Tom Jones concert. It's a definite must listen. And thanks, of course, must go to our series sponsors, Staff Savvy and Retail Integration. Now on to our chat with Paul. Hi everyone, today we're speaking to Paul Griffiths, Director of Payne Hills. Paul, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're very welcome. Would you mind telling our lovely listeners who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. Well, my name's Paul Griffiths. Since November of 2018, I've been the director of the Payne Hills Park Trust.
And what does being a director mean? Like, what do you do day to day?
Gosh, that's a really tricky question. Where do I start with that one? Well, I mean, I oversee everything that the trust does. I feed into a board of trustees, and so in other organisations, I might be called a chief executive or director. Very similar terms, of course. So I have a brilliant senior leadership team that sits, with me working on running all the different areas of Payne Hills. So I have heads of landscape, which you'd expect from a landscape garden. We'll probably talk a bit more about what Payne Hills is later. Director of finance, head of commercial and operations, which is a post that we all know lots about. Head of fundraising, head of marketing, head of education. So those teams, and then that spans out into all their wonderful teams as well. So lots of people. Well, not lots because we're quite a small team, but people working on the Payne Hills Park and the charity that we are.
Maybe fewer people than people expect, but definitely more skills than probably should really belong to that many people. Definitely.
Yeah, we've got about probably 25 staff that are with us all the time, and then a number of I hate the term, but casual staff who work in a tea room in seasonal stuff like that. So we are ably supported by an absolutely amazing team of volunteers. We have about 250, 260 volunteers. The number changes regularly one way and the other because people do come and go, but we have a brilliant team of volunteers that we can work without. As you see so much across the sort of heritage organisations in Hull, we're always so reliant on wonderful volunteers to support our work.
Awesome. That sounds really cool. So this kind of leads me on to a really cool question. So you're now director, but I would like to find out kind of how do you get started in your career? What did you do?
Well, it's an often told tale, but it's a really easy one for me. I went off when I was young. I wanted to go into sort of sports or leisure management. Particularly, I was really keen on sort of going in. I love sport, and I thought if I know I'm not good enough to go and play football or cricket or anything like that. So I looked at doing sort of sports administration, and I was thinking, well, how can I get a job as a sort of commercial manager at a football club or something of that nature? So I set off to university to study leisure management, which was leading. It was a sort of pure sort of leisure and sports or management course with a wild variety of different people. It was the first year the course had ever been run at Bristol University, so it was a real different sort of place to be. During that, we had to do a bit of work experience. We went off for a month during a summer term of our first year, and I was no idea what I wanted to do whatsoever. And I got in touch with a few places, one of which was Hever Castle, and they wonderfully invited me down there. I got to work with a chap called Piers, who was the visitor operations manager, I guess. I'm sure that's his title. I might be got that wrong, but he was just the most inspiring person to spend a month with. His role was looking after everything that opened operationally within the castle. So, our day would be going out in the morning, going from a team meeting in the morning, but then going from shop to cafe to ticket office to everything that we know that happens in operations. We had a brilliant event while I was there where we put lots of flowers in the castle, and I found myself driving this tiny little van round picking up local women's institutes flower displays, and I was given the keys. I'd never driven a van before, and suddenly I was in this funny van. You can't, with no sort of way of seeing out the back. It was a real sort of experience, but I absolutely loved it, and it was just the best sort of month ever. The sun shone throughout the whole. It was that if you could pick a sort of time to spend in a glorious heritage site with wonderful gardens, and you're just walking from side to side. I was there sort of not 7 days a week, but obviously it got eye-opening the weekends, the busiest time. So, Piers was like, well, why don't come in on Monday, but come on Sunday. So you see how that was. You're a perfect person to learn from. And I went back to uni. We, at that point, had to pick a pathway, if you like. So we have leisure management core modules, and then we all had to choose a different pathway. And one of them available was heritage management. It was brand new. It's the first time it'd ever been done. And I thought, well, I'll give that a go, because I've loved working in this heritage environment. And so did that. So my degree is in leisure and heritage management, and started applying from jobs whilst at uni. We didn't have a great deal then of employability stuff, which I think is something that unis do so well now. And I did some work with a lot of work with Solent University in my previous jobs where I am now, and it was great because we were working with students all the time and bringing them into the museum, giving them really good projects and stuff that I know, because some of them still keep in touch, that they've been able to use for their careers and getting further for their careers, which is brilliant. But I was applying for jobs that I had, looking back now, didn't have a hope of getting management jobs of sites and things. You think, well, no one would take you on without any experience. So in the end, I was really lucky and got basically an admin job with English Heritage in what was their head office, well, one of their two head offices then. It was just across the road from Selfridges on Oxford Street, and I was working with the quantity surveying team. So it couldn't have been a lower job, and I don't it was booking train tickets, it was doing the post, and it was in the days where every post that came in had to be stamped and logged, and we show how far we're going back here. But once I was in English Heritage, the great thing was most jobs had to be advertised internally first. So I was constantly, and every week there was days before the internet or email, but a hard copy through the internal mail would come to jobs file, whenever it was, all the jobs that are available internally. And I'd be scouring through because I only had a short-term contract. I was covering maternity leave. And finally got this job at Down House, the home of Charles Darwin, and which hadn't opened to the public. It had been closed, and English Heritage taking it on and done a major restoration project. And it was recruiting. I sort of went and started, and I got this job. It was brilliant. It was sounds a weird title now. It was called senior custodian, although there was no just custodian, so we weren't senior to anyone. And the reason we had that fabulous title was it meant once you're a senior custodian, you could handle money and therefore cash up and do jobs like that. So I absolutely had an amazing 2 years. Stop me if I'm going into too much detail here, won't you? Because I realise I'm rambling.
No, we're loving it. It's brilliant.
But I had a wonderful 2 years. Opening somewhere to the public the first time was something that I've then had to do quite a few times in my career. So it was a real great chance. But this job was one of those, you couldn't have a better grounding in operations in many ways, because you had to do everything that needed doing. We had no cleaners. So one of the tasks first thing in the morning, we sort of had 4 or 5 jobs that we took on a weekly rotation basis. One of which was cleaning the public toilets every morning. One of which was hoovering the house. One of which was going around and doing all the glass, because there was so much glass and cabinets and stuff that they need to do. And then we'd, try and gather for a 15-minute cup of tea if we could before we opened. Well, we always did. And then it was, open to the public, and that could be working on the front desk, one of the things I loved doing then was greeting coach parties. I love that, getting on a coach and saying, welcome, this is what's going to happen. I'm splitting you into groups because the house is small. And had some wonderful times with people. It was just so fabulous. Oh, getting emotional looking back at this. It had its hard side though. And I think this is one of the things I think your listeners and some of your young listeners might resonate with. That sort of thinking, right, I've done this now. I need to go into a management job. And I kept going for management job, deputy manager jobs, because all sites then had a head custodian, deputy head custodian, or site manager. They were very funny old titles in the H in those days. And but kept being turned down for this sort of like, you haven't got your management experience was always the reason. And I was like, how do you get that if you can't get for the deputy job? You think it was the obvious route in. And I was really fortunate. We had an amazing volunteer at Down House called Jeff, who's sadly not with us anymore. He'd had the most fascinating career. He'd been a nuclear scientist, and he was if you flicked in Who's Who, he appeared in there. But he was the most amazing man who sort of took my case under his wing, if you like, and was like, well, he got really frustrated. I was coming back for these jobs and not getting it. Right, how do we? He really took the time to spend with me working on, where you might have had some management experience. And this is one of the things I found myself saying to students again, when you was at uni, did you head up a team that was working on a project? Oh, most people go, yeah, I did. I was team leader. There you go. Perfect example. Have you captained the netball, football, rugby team? Oh, yeah, I've done that. Right, okay. So therefore, you've been managing people. You're taking on these tasks. So make some more of that, or where you've actually taken on jobs within your own role. And it was so brilliant, Jeff, that got me thinking of these things. And because Down House, we all had to do everything. So we was always doing little projects. And I can remember trying to negotiate with BT to get the price of our, to get the internet working, because in those days it was dial up and all sorts. And trying to get the phone, things like this. And it was just saying to you, they're really good examples of where you can use and, where things. So I went from, and I've eventually got a job as the head custodian, which was, site manager, if you like, at the Jewel Tower, which is the oldest surviving bit of the Palace of Westminster. So if you watch the news on, BBC ITV, they're always being interviewed behind by the Jewel Tower. It's a fascinating little site. And I spent a year there, and it was my first management job, managing people. So lots of things you had to learn in that, obviously, and and growing up, I think I was still only in my early 20s, and so you think you know everything, don't you? But you really don't, and quickly learn that you don't when people tell you so. I was fortunate then to get a job site manager of Wellington Arch, and that was another not been open to the public before, and that was just an absolute. It was a really sort of one of those changing life, because I'd moved out of home to Ellie, and I'd sort of moved. That's why my wife we've moved in together. So it was like this really weird change of life, sort of moving into a little flat and suddenly living outside of your parents' life, and at the same time as getting this really, for me then, and I still look back, like massive jump for job to be running this big site, and that was going. I had to go and recruit my own team and train, develop, open, and then it was also the first site the H had where it was just as important for the hospitality side in the evening as it was for the visitor side. So there was myself and the hospitality manager Fiona, who were just like this duo of people having to run this site that was suddenly open all hours, if you like, and no one had really come across that before. So, we was in at 8 and working till 2 in midnight, 2 in the morning with, dinners, parties, events, and really became one of the tastes of London, because this was pre, the crashes and the recessions that we had. This was 2001, and everyone had money to spend. So every company under the sun was having glorious parties.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second, Paul, because you said something quite interesting that I think I just want to touch on, because actually you answered my next question already. But that milestone in your life of, you met your now wife, you've moved out of home, and you've got a job suddenly that feels like a real job. I think all of us sort of have that early 20s maybe experience, maybe later in the 20s, where you think, oh, this is the job, right? This is the job now. I've kind of got to somewhere, or it feels quite significant. And I certainly remember that, and I'm sure Cart will, is it? But as you sort of get older and further away from that, you realise actually there's going to be lots of those significant milestones in your life.
Yeah, and absolutely.
Could you sort of talk to us about maybe the other jumps that you've done? So where you've sort of felt, that was kind of that significant job. What was the next job that I sort of went, that's the next big leap for me? What came?
It was funny that you should say that, because the big leap for me in that Wellington Arch job, I was 25 at the time, so 2001, was that I moved out being in a uniform, because I'd been in my job at Down House, and my job at and I have nothing against it. I mean, I happily will walk out now with a painted fleece on without thinking anything of it. But I was suddenly in shirt, tie, suit, going from a quite nice flat that we were renting, we managed to get really good terms because it was still a building site. Most of the rest of the place they were doing, because it was a new development. We got it for a couple of years and it was fab. But you know what I mean? I was suddenly going out like I felt like I was going to a proper place of work, not in khaki trousers and EH's uniform was so much better now. By the time it was that sort of like khaki shirt with checks, really country feel. And so suddenly I'd got into that. And that was a big leap in that weird, for me mentally, I was suddenly there, I was working in London. It felt hip and cool and,
I wonder, really and I wonder actually now, because when you said that also would have been, I would have worn uniform on and off up to that point. But that was certainly the first job that I have that feeling about was certainly that, felt like, oh, I get to wear my own clothes now. I get to have a bit of independence. So I wonder how many people that resonates with. That'd be really interesting.
I need to go shopping at, and buy some nice shirts and ties and stuff. Yeah, no, but you asked a question about other leaps. So I was fortunate. I was very fortunate in to be in the right place at the right time. And this happened to me a couple of times. I must confess, luck comes into a lot of things, I think. But I should tell you another story. Sorry about this wedding time. When I went for my interview, I bought this to be then. I don't know what it is, a really nice grey suit and like a really nice man shop. One of those sort of probably was only 90 quid, but it felt really a bit different to a plain suit. It was really, and I've wore it for the first time for the interview. And it was the days of bus conductors and those old Route Master buses. I was getting the bus back to the Jewel Tower. And the guy sitting there, it was a really great, fun sort of, obviously, conductor. And he said, "Oh, where have you been going?" And I said, "I've just been for an interview." He said, "With that suit, you've definitely got the job." And I got it. It was just like, that sort of nice people to bump into in life. And I was just like, "Oh, that's lovely." Go back to what I was saying. So on my, later in my career, my boss got promoted. And I was to sort of a head of visitor operations role. She then went into the area regional director from the head of visitor operations role. And I was literally just going on holiday. It was about 5 to 5. She rang me up on a Friday night, and I thought she was just ringing to say, have a nice holiday, because she still is a very lovely person. But, at the time, sort of, she said, "Oh, and tell me this news. I've just been promoted this role as acting role." I said, "All right, brilliant. Well, congratulations." She said, "Right, so when you get back from your holiday, I'm going to need you to act into my role because there's no one else to do that. And we'll both just be acting up for 6 months, and then while they decide what they're going to do for recruitment." And I thought, "Oh, right. Great, never say no to anything." And so I ended up sort of acting in a role that I don't think I would have applied for if it had been advertised, because I wouldn't have thought I was the right person or level for that job. But then, of course, found myself doing it for 6 months, getting into it, learning it. And so then when it was advertised, and it went out externally advertised, that was a bit of a knock, thinking, right, they obviously think that, but actually I later heard that they just wanted to prove that, well, if I got it, that I'd beaten anyone else that had gone for it. So, which I hadn't thought at the time. I was just cursing, thinking if I'd been internal, I don't know. But of course, that it was just that luck of being there and having that job, and then getting this job, and it was slightly bigger than the one I've been acting in, and that was a huge step, because suddenly I was running half the London sites, and London then was split into London North and London South for EH, and I was what was I called then? Head of Visitor Operations, London North, and I merrily cut away with that job, running the Central London sites and Kenwood House up in Hampstead. And then the guy who was running London South left, and he left quite quickly for various reasons. And so we had another one of these moments where my boss said, Rebecca, I was speaking on the phone again late on a Friday evening, trying to work out how we were going to cover this situation with the person who'd left. And she was like, "Well, could you just go down and run London South a bit?" And I said, "Well, I don't really want to do that, but why don't I just do both and just rely on the managers on the sites to all step up as well, and we'll all just..." And she was like, "Oh, you can't do that." And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm sure I can." So we had the weekend to think about it. I went out with that night with two of my business services managers. We went to the pub in Hampstead, and they were both like, "We're really worried about you doing this because this is this is a lot of work." And I was like, "Yeah, but you guys are great, so I can leave you here to crack on and not have to worry about Kenwood because you guys are brilliant. And I know the team elsewhere. They've had a rocky time for various reasons, but they'll be cool." And so Monday we agreed to do it. And so I started just doing the whole of London. And of course, again, then that rolled into being a permanent job, because I was just doing it on an acting basis because they were going to recruit all the time. But in the end, we settled on doing it full time and loved it. So again, that sort of strange, like being right place, right time. Suddenly I had this much bigger job. It became an area manager job, and it was just probably had the most amazing 4 years in it, I think. I was rubbish, and I still am a bit rubbish at diary management. It was even more rubbish then when you were trying to get round to different sites in London. And you know what it's like. You agree to. I was agreeing to stuff in North London at 10 o'clock and say, "Oh, yeah, I'll be in South East London at 2." And of course, not home.
Yeah, right.
But luckily, I had an absolutely amazing team. We are all still in touch with each other. They were a brilliant bunch, and so they all just got what we were trying to do, and we just formed such a great working relationship. And everyone, you know, and we were managing to as well include a lot of the more junior managers in that, people that you're going, right, they've got real skills. How do we get them? Well, how do we second them into another site, and how do we get them getting those skills and experience that, you know, they've all been able to go on and do great stuff. And you know, I love it when you bump into someone and say, "Oh, you gave me this job and you did this." It's just such a nice thing, isn't it? And yeah,
that's an interesting thing as well, like you say, because one of the things, you know, we talk about when we talk about careers is there is a lot of just being in the right place at the right time. And you can improve your chances by saying yes to things. So, you know, like you said, that it might not have seemed like a job you might apply for because it maybe felt too big, but there's no harm in trying a job for 6 months. And if you don't like it, going and doing something else. I think to not be too afraid of failing, as long as, you know, you've got the support around you and you can sort of humbly bow out if it's not quite the right thing.
Yeah.
But you get a lot of opportunities that way.
Well, that's something I'd say. And I've heard other guests on your podcast say it's a lot, you know, just you say yes to things because, as you said, actually, what's the worst thing that we get a bit of experience, or you show someone you can do it, or you think this isn't for me, and maybe this isn't where I want to be. But I think we all find you step into stuff and you think, actually, I can do this. Why didn't I? You know, I wouldn't have thought myself. You know, I think we all, well, we don't necessarily, but you know, more people than ever get the old imposter syndrome. I still get it a lot now. You know, different stuff, and have to, you know, think, well, but actually, I'm here because I've done this, or you know, I've been asked to come and sit on this committee by the local council and sit amongst local councillors or whatever, and people think they've asked me to do it, so they must have thought I've got skills and ability to do it.
Introducing Meridian Experience from Retail Integration, the leading multi-channel ticketing, retail and membership system for visitor attractions. Working with visitor attractions for over 25 years, Retail Integration have developed the ultimate solution that enables some of Ireland's leading visitor attractions manage every aspect of their business, from ticketing and admissions to merchandising, food and loyalty programs in one single system. Customer experience is at the heart of what we do. Contact us today and let Retail Integration help you to exceed visitor expectations. We listen, we develop, we deliver.
You've got a worth of knowledge, a worth of experience in the amount of different locations you've worked at in the UK. So I just kind of wanted to talk about a couple of top tips that you can share with our listeners. Like let's say 3 top tips that would be really cool for people to get into the tourist attractions industry that you can share with us.
I think there's that first one. We've just been talking about this, but just to try and say yes to stuff. I think it's really important. And I hate the phrase jobs worth, but don't say, well, that's not my job description. No, I'm not. It's it's above my pay grade or any of that. I hate all those phrases. I hate hearing them. You know, it's just because I think most people I can get why people think, well, actually, I'd like to get something extra for doing it. I get that. And I've been very fortunate, you know, I've agreed to stuff without thinking about financial gain. And then my managers have said, you know, we'll pay you 10% more for doing this, won't you? And I'm like, well, I'd actually thought of that. That's lovely. Thank you so much. Because for me, it's just about, well, actually, I can take on that extra experience, or I can take on that extra job, or, you know, or take on extra challenges. So I think that's the thing is just for people coming in, don't be thinking, oh, it's not my job description. Oh, it's not. Oh, because actually, anything you can do to show your managers that you're really willing to muck in. I think in an operational side, that's still so important because, you know, attractions still running on a shoestring in many cases and need you to have you turn your hand to everything. I mean, you know, we were talking earlier, looking back on my first job in the sort of business operations world, and that's what we had to do. Everything that had to come up in the day-to-day running of that attraction was down to us and the little team we had, and it was, you know, you relied on each other, and that's where you learn so many things. So I think that's important. I think trying to get knowledge of the organisation you're working for is so vital as well. And in many ways, of course, if you're working in the heritage world, a history of it as well, because people will expect you to know it. But I think, you know, learning particularly coming into the industry, learn about the sort of, expected etiquettes of the business. What is expected in terms of dress code. And I know that sounds a bit old fashioned, but you can't necessarily dress as you might do down the pub when you're at work. You've got to accept that.
I really struggle with, for those people who don't know me personally, I can be quite an outrageous dresser. I like patterns. We went to see a show this weekend about a guy who was obsessed with Disney and putting on parades when he was a kid and stuff. And I'm sure it's not offensive to anyone, but it's called My Son's a Queer, But What Can You Do? And my mum took me and my mum said, I sort of about having a queer son. And I said, well, it's fine because you got a queer son for a daughter, fortunately. Is that, I love all that stuff. I love the garishness and the drag queenness and the whatever. But there's times where that's appropriate. There's times when it's not. And I think even if there is no dress code, I like to be told, where can I get away with that appropriateness? I will never wear a suit to work. I'll be very clear about it. And I really don't particularly like crappy uniform. I like a good uniform. I think everyone should go to work and feel comfortable. I agree. But I do think it's really important for people to know, actually, and maybe some of it's a little bit that fear of not knowing if you'll fit in or whatever is, just to say, are we a casual team? Are we a jeans team? Can I wear trainers? Even if there is no dress code, sometimes just nice to be told what the expectation is, even if it's not always a suit and tie.
Well, I'm going to an event tomorrow night, and earlier on today, I emailed the guy who invited me and asked him what the dress code was, because I want to know, is it suit and tie? And I will have, I don't often wear a suit and tie to work anymore because I'm in a garden environment. But I'm normally be in a shirt and chinos or something of that nature with a jacket, a blazer lined up to put on when I need to. But I still don't. And still sometimes put a suit. Oh, actually, I forgot how nice this was. Actually, to look quite smart. But I'm still always really nervous about turning up to something and thinking, oh, everyone else is in a suit and tie, and I've come in jeans and a blazer, or vice versa, or the other way around. No one's in a suit and I'm still in a suit, and everyone else is in shorts and t-shirt. Yeah. And I think that's, it's always, it's that wanting to fit in, isn't it? But I think that's, I'd always say to people, that's advice. You've got to fit it in the worst possible way. And it sounds awful to say this, but you do need to try and fit in the workplace, because you don't want to be so out there that you just, And
I'd also suggest that if you don't fit in that sense, maybe it's not the right workplace.
Possibly, yeah.
Is that, if you're not a suit and tie person, and you are going to work in an investment bank, and maybe I'm doing a disservice to investment bankers here, but, that maybe it's not the environment for you.
Yeah.
Maybe that's, And so tip number 3.
I think learning is so important of this, but things so different now. Things like this podcast that you guys are doing is an amazing service for people in our industry. The one that Robert Cheese and Kelly will do of Skip Q, brilliant. What a thing to have had. I'd love to be listening to. I love listening to all these things now of other people's careers and tips and advice. And the amount of times I go away and think, right, I need to think about that, or that's a brilliant piece, or I need to go and visit that site, or follow up with the person and say, can I come and see you, please? Because actually you're doing something that I'd really want to do. And again, I think our industry is amazing for that, you can ring someone up and you could say, can I come and have a coffee with you? And they will say normally yes, and then normally also say, well, then tell you whatever you want to know. Visitor numbers, people aren't nervous of that sort of business in the heritage and operation. I think if you're a bit more in the commercial field, if you're working for someone like Warner Brothers or Merlin, I think that becomes a very different field. But if you're working for a small attraction or a heritage base particularly, people are so open. You think about people who come on your show and reveal all sorts, and people who go on Skip the Queue and say all sorts of things, and just telling what they've been doing, and it's just, I find that such a resource that wasn't there. Sorry, I'm probably going over 3 tips, but I think that sort of don't be scared to ask someone for help is so crucial, because most people will give you half an hour on a Zoom call now, and they don't even have to go meet, or will direct you towards a mentoring scheme that ACE are running or something of that nature, where you can get real help and real career guidance.
Well, that leads me to my next question, Paul. It's talking about where do we kind of learn more about the industry. So can you kind of share us of what you do to kind of get yourself on trend and what's happening?
So I subscribe to lots of things like Blue Loop's daily notice is great because there's 10 things that are happening every day, and there is free content. You haven't even had to join, you've had to sign up to one mailing list, and then you've got all these experts writing on a daily basis about what's happening, and that's I'm in the heritage world, and I always have been in heritage, but I've always looked at the commercial world as well but actually I couldn't afford that. But what are they doing? Or, how does Disney's customer service and the way they run that? I mean, it's just, other podcasts I've listened to around, Dan and Lee Cockrell, two guys who I just find amazingly inspiring people. I was really fortunate during lockdown to be accepted on something that Dan did, where he had brought together sort of 20 people from around the world just to talk about the industry and leadership and all that sort of stuff. So really was fascinating picking up on that. It's that. So I think things like podcasts are so important now. I mean, that's the new world, of course. Traditional books, media, things like social media, maybe you should say, but I found I learned so much through Twitter. What a new
shout out for Twitter, definitely.
I mean, I'm still I use Twitter for more of a work thing and Facebook maybe for more friends. But I find Facebook really weird these days because all I ever see is adverts for things that I aren't really interested in, or a band I've once seen, what they're doing on the latest tour. Whereas Twitter normally tends to be people you do know and you respect, or whatever, and you've chosen to look at. But from our industry, I mean, things like Alva's stuff or stuff that Bernard puts out on Twitter is fascinating stuff, for trends and visitor numbers and what's happening. Obviously, what other attractions are doing is always on there. Obviously, going to things like conference and things like the Association of Cultural Enterprises conference. I sadly didn't get to go this year. It's the first one I've not been to for about 10 years. But I always find those sorts of events fascinating because people are very honest, and the speakers of those sort of conferences will get up and tell you exactly the do's and the don'ts, because people won't always just stand up and go, this has been an amazing success. The amount of times I've heard people say, so we did this and it was an epic failure and I advise you all not to do it. Note to self, don't do that. Because people are very honest with their experience, and I think you learn all the time what's going on. So for me, where do I learn? Well, in social media, the emails and Blue Loop's attractions management. That's another people. I mean, that's the magazine I get sent on a digital copy. We seem to get every couple of months, but fascinating interviews in there with people who are absolutely always the people at the top of their game, being talking about, and it really is, just everywhere. I would say there's stuff out there these days. So much more than when we were starting in our careers, because of course there was hardly any of this stuff. Well, certainly in my
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is all kind of recent, and the information is just literally like gold mine stuff. Something that you mentioned a bit earlier about mentoring. Have you had any experience in that? Someone mentoring? No, sorry, you did get someone to mentor you, but have you mentored somebody else, or
I've done a bit of that? I've
done advice?
Anything massively formal. I mean, I've had a number of people ring up and ask questions and talk through stuff, and obviously, particularly when I was at EH, I had quite a big team in the end because the whole of London, so lots of people would pop in and have conversations almost like what we're having now. Well, what did you do that? Or, particularly if people get frustrated that they don't feel their careers moving, and how can they move on, or what can they look at? Or I think there's mentors out there all over the place. I mean, I've never had a formal mentor, although I know that there's some great mentoring programs to fix people up with other people. I mentioned them earlier on about the conference, but the Association of Cultural Enterprises has a brilliant mentoring scheme, and they're always, I think it's once a year that's open for both mentors and mentees to apply and get the skills both ways. So I think, or it could be looking for someone, or asking for someone else, do you know anyone I could mentor me or would be useful to talk to? Because I think, always keen to try and give back. I think most people are always trying to keen and happy to give something back to, the younger generations coming through, and make sure you're not pulling the ladder up behind yourself, because actually you need people coming through, because you need good people in your business to run it, and so you want those people to be keen, enthusiastic.
I think that's really interesting as well, when the people who do gatekeep, the people who do pull the ladder up behind them, I think my mentality around that, and I'm sure yours would be the same, is I don't want to do my job forever. I want to do the next job. And if I don't bring up people behind me, I'm going to find it really difficult to continue to climb myself, because,
yes,
you know, and bringing up that talent behind you makes your life easier in the long run, because the further you get on in your career, you need to have good people working with you as well. You know, there's no point sort of keeping good people out of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's some of the best people I've worked with in my career. They've mostly been people that we've been able to recruit. I mean, we've had to recruit at some point from outside, but then you've taken them on they've either moved up when you moved up, or they've come at a junior level and they've got real talent and you've managed to develop them. And, you know, the best people I've worked with have come up through different levels of an organisation. So and obviously they then know the organisation well, you know each other, you know, they can part with my madness and, you know, crack on with stuff, as well as, you know, where sometimes you bring people in new and it's a whole new system, so you've got to learn about each other as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of sort of a bit of crystal ball gazing of what that future might look like, do you think your role will change? Like, do you think a director of a business will look different in the future? Do you think technology will change it, or anything else that you can think of?
I think it's trying to find balances in these things, isn't it? And, you know, I think the pandemic has changed many of the ways we're working. I mean, I never had worked from home in my life before I had to. I mean, it might have been the odd half an hour here or there, but I hated it with passion. And then suddenly, of course, we were sent home by Boris, and, you know, you had no choice. But then I found, actually, I can get so much more done. Which then, of course, is finding that balance, because I can sort of do that, but there's lots of other staff who can't. And so, you know, I was at the Heritage Alliances conference the other day, and there was a leadership team, and they made some really amazingly pertinent points. And one of which was the difficulty of sites where you need to have people on, but the expectation that a lot of people have now for hybrid working, particularly if they're in support functions. And by that, I don't mean sort of support as in, you know, admin roles, but it might be an admin role. But, you know, there's roles that people need to be on site every day because they've got to answer the phone, they've got to deal with the public, or they've got to work in a team room. Or whereas, you know, some other roles, it might be that you think, well, actually, I could work from home every day of my life, and I can still churn out the reports I need to. So I think there's going to be this sort of hybrid working balance. It's going to be really tricky to negotiate in the future. I can't see the roles change, because I think you're always going to need, if you've got a visitor attraction, you're always going to need a team of people, and you're always going to need someone, you know, working, you know, pulling it together, I guess. Particularly, you know, you've got the trustees and the governance side as well, so there's all that side to run. And as we touched on earlier, you always want to surround yourself with the best possible people, because if you've not got good people around you, then you're really going to struggle. And that's, you know, I've been, again, very fortunate to have had throughout my career, when I was at the Melrose and now here at Painshill, amazing teams around me, some of which I've inherited in time, some of which you've recruited. And, you know, love it when you can develop people into new roles, or you can find skills for people and say, actually, that's a really good thing for you to step into. I've loved it, as I say earlier, when people have stepped up through roles, or you've developed them into something new and you've watched them flourish, because that's what it's all about, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of your role as a manager, to kind of give the skills and experiences to your employees so they can grow up. You know, I've had situations where I've trained somebody and they've gone over above me. You know, some people might feel like, oh, why is that happening? It's like, for me, I'm like, do you know what? Well done to you, you know, for learning that skill. And I'm proud that I've taught you that and showed that to you, and you've progressed. So that's really cool. And that kind of leads me to our last question, Paul. I could listen to you for ages, seriously. But it's kind of like, I want to talk about the most important qualities that someone will need to have to succeed in our industry. So if you've got 2 or 3 qualities or skill sets you can share with us, that'd be really great.
I think you've got to like people. And I say that because the public are a fabulously wonderful bunch of, you know, bringing to you different stuff every day that you need to be able to deal with. And, you know, people will want to come and talk about all sorts of things. I was out for a run the other day, and someone stopped me on my run Well, I wasn't going very fast, as you can imagine. So it wasn't much to stop me. But to ask me some really bizarre question about the estate. And it was very strange because firstly, I was really surprised that someone stopped me. And I was obviously dressed in running kit and not with a badge saying, please stop me and ask tourist questions. Thanks. But of course, I stopped and we chatted and managed to tell her what she needed to know. And off she went saying, oh, you've made my day. And I was, oh, well, lovely. But I think that's the thing. You've got to have the people skills or get on with people. I think that's vital. It sounds really cliche, but I think you've got to have a good sense of humour. I think you've got to be able to laugh, obviously at yourself. That's very important. But also just laugh at things that happen because things will be hilarious and there will be struggling days and there will be challenging times. And, we've all been through, everyone's had the pandemic, obviously, even our youngest of listeners will have gone through that recently. And people have been leaving uni and they haven't had any days with anyone else, and all sorts of strain. All the things that we enjoyed of having years of not having. But, so you've got to be able to laugh at that, and look back, and look at stuff, and see the funny side. I think where possible, you need to always have the half full attitude as well. Come on, this is good. Not always be thinking, oh dear, poor old eel, woe is me. You need to be well, actually, how do I see the positive in this? Because especially if you move into managerial roles, your team will expect that. They won't want to hear you moaning and telling them everything's dreadful. They want to hear you say, this is great, we're going to sort this, this is brilliant, we're on top of this, this is what we can do. So I think that my three things to that would, again, is to be a people person, laugh at yourself, be very positive, and going back to what we said earlier, I think that sort of accepting challenges and saying yes is so vital to be able to crack on with.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of I think things get clouded by the pandemic because you think that it was so bad and it was so kind of scarring for individuals and industry and whatever, is that you forget actually we all had crises before this. There's the crises. And I think when we talk about, people being resilient and positive about work, and, you do have to come with a sense of humour because you know what? Shit does happen that you're not expecting. And actually, I think a lot of that people think, oh, it's got to be pandemic sized. And it might not be. I worked in an aquarium and you'd come in one day and someone had forgot to turn a tank off and you'd be a foot underwater. And what are you going to do if you don't laugh about it? I think not everything has to be a huge disaster, but you also need to be able to have a bit of a sense of humour when those disasters come, because they will inevitably.
You're right, absolutely. And there will be stuff that really challenges you. I mean, things like, I was working in a Wellington Arch on 9/11, that was suddenly, well, what on earth is going on? The world's in a real... London went silent. And we were hosting an event that night for the British Guild of Travel Writers, and it's sort of like, well, does it go on? Does it not go? So, and you're balancing stuff, and that major world event, but you're panicking slightly about whether the caterers are still going to turn up to the wine and the canapes, and if the event's still going to go. It's this strange thing that you have these. We had a really horrible. We have a bit of an issue with flooding here at Paynes Hill. And we had a flood. The river is known as the River Mole. I mean, it's underwater for lots of it, but it is when it comes up, it really does, and it really causes problems because it floods. And it's my first experience of flooding ever. And it was just before Christmas, literally just before Christmas. Father Christmas was in the grotto doing his ho 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 bit. We had a little land train travelling around the site to drop kids off at the grotto, and then the event had gone fabulously. And then the morning, we were sort of looking at the river again. It's got up a bit high, and by 12 o'clock, it broke slightly in one area. By 1 o'clock, the whole thing flooded. There was barely see the path. And, I was driving a buggy trying to evacuate Santa, some elves and various things around the estate while the water's coming in. You think, this feels like some sort of ride that would be, I don't know, Chessington, where the water's flowing, but it's a controlled situation. You're on a track and you barely know what they're doing here. Whereas here, I'm driving through this water, everything. This is probably the most stupid, unsafe thing I've ever done. And of course, it was complete panic. We then were dealing with the public, as we talked about with, so we're on, we put on social media that we've had to close, floods, we're doing pictures. One woman phone even put in and said, oh, this is dreadful, you closed. What am I supposed to tell my children? They're coming tomorrow to see Father Christmas. And it was brilliant, because this is why I love the public, because the public did our job for us. they all started answering this woman, just saying, it's not their fault. Look, it's flooded. How could they possibly have done anything else? And then we had this. Then one woman came on from somewhere, one of the poor African nations, saying that the kids here won't even have any Christmas present. Why are you complaining about this site having having? And we just sat there in the afternoon while all this was going on, going, well, we've got a lot of problems, but these people are actually answering this one for us. But we did, we tried to not let anyone disappointed. So we got Father Christmas over to dry land. And we were letting people come in and just still meet him. So people who are already travelling rather, God, the complaints we got that it wasn't the experience. You think, we really had tried to do something to say, so your kids did not see him. But it's these things that do make you think, and also now when we're planning this stuff, the flooding comes into our equation. What is our plan B for flooding? So if we've got a trail around the site, okay, where are we moving it to if this happens? Because we've got stung, and all these things happen, and you just have to sometimes just laugh about it. I had
I think that thing of thinking, while you're doing whatever it is you're doing, whilst you're evacuating Santa or wet vacking or whatever it is that you've come into, is you will look back on this stuff and laugh eventually. Like, it might not be today, but if you don't laugh about it in the future, you're never going to come back to work again.
And sometimes it's just like that evening where you sat with the team and good God, how did that happen? We when I worked at Kenwood, I was managing London's historic properties free agent. We put on concert series, and one of the opening nights was the Legends of Tom Jones, and it was a really weird day. It was beautiful sunshine, but we knew it was going to tip it down that night, because the weather map just was showing this horrible band of rain. And I remember sat on the stage about 3 o'clock in the afternoon with my colleague Dan, and we just both had a coffee, and we just like, not a cloud in the sky. It was just like, how is this going to turn? And of course, that night it started raining, needless to say. Tom came on a bit late, which was a bit annoying, but there we go. He did a good set, actually. He was very good. But just towards the end of it, I got this phone call to go backstage, not from a sort of jolly old backstage party. It was the mayor and the ex-mayor had somehow managed to get into a fight with a bloke with an umbrella, who then made some unfortunate terms. And so I'm backstage in the pissing rain. I'd had a couple of beers most because I was off duty. I wasn't working that night. I was not managing it. I was there as to liaise with some guests early on. And there I was trying to deal in the middle of the night with what might come on social media, because it was then early terms of that. So these things are always going to have these fun stories, and for years to come, you can dine out on the Tom Jones incident.
One day you'll be telling it on a podcast to somebody.
People will be thinking it's hilarious. But it was funny because you sort of like, then I was trying to unpick it the following day, and I remember something you said about a mentor of my ex-boss who used to have this job and had gone on to, what was she doing at that point? She's gone on so many fabulous stuff since then. She's running the O2 for a while and then working for Lloyd Webber and now doing something else. But she's, I texted her in the morning because she had sort of my guest seats with some friends, and I was like, I don't suppose you saw anything of this incident, did you? Within 20 minutes, she'd rung me. I was in the supermarket doing the weekly shop. She rung me, and she just like, for the next 25 minutes, was like, right, so you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. Have you asked this question? And it was just the best phone call ever, because it was like, no, I haven't really thought of that. And it was just so typical of her to just be, immediately thinking of things that I hadn't thought of, but also had think nothing of on a Saturday morning, phoning me up and saying, this is what you need to do. And I think that's where, you work with people, and, I wouldn't be where I was if I hadn't worked for her. So it's brilliant relationship we still have. And some funny times, those Kenwood concerts, people's odd riders and things like that. I won't say
I think on my list of advice for people is don't work anywhere that does concerts. Would be in my experience of running concerts. And generally I think most people's experience of running concerts is just don't do it. There's my career advice for you all, kids.
Do you know what though? I think some of the best times I had, exciting times to do a concert series, is in the build up as well, and learning a lot about that industry, because I've always been a massive music fan, as you know, Carly, we talked about it before, but I'm love going to gigs and doing stuff. So actually learning about the industry a little bit, of how it's promoted, how they negotiate with artists, and how that all worked, was quite fascinating. This is a few years ago now, and we've got a mini series coming up at Paynes Hill this summer. So we're doing summer lates. We've gone completely down the tribute band route this year because it's small attendances. We're not going to have big artists, but we found that worked really well last summer when we did the tribute night. So, if you stand towards the back, you can think you're putting on Bon Jovi and AC/DC. In fact, a woman stopped me in the room the other day and asked me, I hope she's not listening to this podcast, but said, "Is this the real Bon Jovi coming?" And I was like, "Yes, of course, for £12.50 a ticket in our field at the back, this very small stage."
He's a big fan of Painshill, I hear. So
he loves it. Yes. John Bon Jovi's always coming alongside AC/DC, Elton John, and Fleetwood Mac. All these bands.
Amazing.
But that's a great. In our industry as well, it's always trying to vary what you do because actually you want to always be attracting different audiences. And if you put on concerts or you put on theatre, it just brings different people in. And I think if you're in the heritage industry or you're running a park or attraction, you need to be varying your audience. And that's why I think it's so important that you are always doing different stuff and you're always trying to look at what other people are doing and go, that's interesting. How could we do that? And at the same time, we've got another site coming to see us recently because they were really impressed with our fairy doors. And we were like, well, come up and learn about it. You're nowhere near us. So it's actually quite an honour. You've looked and seen what we've done and thought it's impressive and you want to come and do it yourself. So lovely. Let's show you around and show you what we did. Hope you might put it on better and we'll come and learn from you. So,
so you bring me to my final question, Paul. This, like Carl said, we could talk forever. I know the three of us.
Yeah, we can.
Anyway, but if people do want to come and find you and ask you some questions about fairy doors or John Bon Jovi or whatever it may be that they feel.
I've never met John Bon Jovi, but there's a bloke called Dave who looks a bit like him and performs really well.
Oh, is it? Okay, all right.
Yes. Whereabouts could they find you? Where's the best place to come looking for you?
Twitter's always a good place. You find me on there. I'm always happy with that. LinkedIn, of course, or if you want to drop me an email, paulgriffiths@painshill.co.uk. But Twitter's, look up on there and we can go from there.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you so much, Paul. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Paul. It's been great.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I'm really a big fan of your show. So thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate. Again, thank you so much for listening to the Brown Sign Project. In our next episode, we're going to talk to the founder of Reworks Consulting, Sarah Briggs.
And thanks again to our series sponsors, Staff Savvy and Retail Integration. The Brown Sign Project was edited by Paul Tyler. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter @BrownSignPod, or you can find us on LinkedIn.